That was good. Speaker, you know, the corrections officers have long understood that the use of segregation without adequate guidelines and principles and reforms was something that had the potential to be abused. So, but also without, again, the oversight and the accountability and the resources. So imagine, Speaker, the conditions that require putting an inmate in segregation. What leads to an inmate actually being put into segregation? Sometimes it's voluntary segregation because the inmate feels threatened by other inmates because of their, whatever the conditions are, their situation. And that's something that the bill talks about as well. But sometimes, Speaker, and with limited resources and limited tools at corrections officers' disposal, segregation is a valuable tool. It is one that, you know, they use to support, you know, support the safety of themselves, their colleagues, and other inmates. And you know, the government has done a pretty terrible job in acknowledging that that is one of their limited tools. That's one of the things that, you know, the last course of action that they have to actually protect themselves without any other resources, without interventions on the inside that can identify persons that are at risk of, you know, volatile situations, or at risk of harming themselves or other people. Again, skeleton crews inside these facilities. And if you've ever had the chance to tour one of our provincial facilities, I urge you to do it if you haven't done it. It is an eye-opener. For some, yeah, I knew that was going to come out. I knew that was going to happen. You know, go ahead, spend a night in the clink.
I've been there.
I believe it.
Yeah, we do. But in all seriousness, it's important to get a visual perspective of what that job is and the challenges that arise from working inside a corrections facility. Especially if you look at the contrast between, you know, an older facility and a newer facility in terms of the resources and the systems that are in place. I'll tell you, from my experience, newer facilities make it a lot easier for the movement of inmates, for the adequate programs that need to be delivered inside those facilities. That, you know, that's just what society, I think, has come to today, that we understand that, you know, that these facilities have to be more than just bars and locks. They have to actually you know, support some of those programs and the delivery of them. You go to an older facility, Speaker, I mean, leaky roofs, inadequate heating, ventilation, no natural light in these facilities. You know, literally buildings that are crumbling, not the best access for transportation between court and you know, inmate transfer. Security concerns, let's talk about that, where, you know, contraband is a real problem. In this day and age, we have just an enormous amount of ingenuity that comes from the criminal element to get contraband inside facilities and outside of facilities. And this is another role that corrections officers have to play day in and day out. Believe me, Speaker, they are not prone to wanting to do full searches of inmates. This is not a good job. This is something that they really, you know, would rather not have to do. They would love to be able to rely on body scanners, and they'd love to have operational metal detectors. But in some of the facilities, these machines exist, and this technology exists, yet the resources aren't there to support the use of them. So you've got a full body scanner sitting there, ready to be used, but no one hired or trained to actually use it. Sits idle while contraband enters into the facility. They have, you know, there are provisions within the bill that talks about the ability for COs to inspect mail. I've heard stories where mail's coming in from the outside and it is laced now with fentanyl or carfentanil. And we all know now that exposure to that can kill you. If you touch it or inhale it or ingest it, you die. And there are limitations now on what COs can do to intercept that suspected contraband through the mail system. That's going to put them at a disadvantage. That's going to jeopardize the safety of the facility and of the people that work there and who are housed there. There's also the idea where, again, speaking to the ingenuity of the criminal element, there's activity that continues to exist from the inside and the outside, where communications between inmates and folks on the outside perpetuate a continuation of criminal activity on the outside. And there are cases where you've talked to COs where they've intercepted mail that talked about a plan to do this, to cause a crime, and that was stopped because they suspected. They had they had the knowledge that that was going on, and they were able to intervene. That's called going above and beyond. These are the stories that you never hear unless you talk to our COs, our frontline officers in those facilities. We haven't heard the government talk about the need to support those types of activities. What are the tools that are being given to ensure that they're doing their jobs fully to the extent of their training and their abilities and their knowledge and experience? They are asking for it. They want to provide a safe and secure environment for themselves, for their colleagues, for the inmates. But it's getting harder and harder. And, again, a glaring omission in this bill, Speaker, is those resources that we know are so vital to the execution of those programs and of those actions. And so, I would ask the government, and I'll ask anyone in the ministry or the minister herself, when can we expect to see those? When can we expect to see the adequate resources flow through? Because this will all be for naught if we don't see real tangible action in our communities. The bill, Speaker, so talks about segregation, talks about the reforms to segregation. We support them with the caveat that that can't be the only thing. It talks about the establishment of a chief investigator that has, prescribed abilities to investigate the use of segregation, to compel reporting, a whole host of other things that are not contentious, that I think make sense. Talks about representation from the public that I think also will go a long way to bringing some lay person involvement into the system, into their regional system, and to potentially expand the knowledge base of our communities as to what happens behind those doors and within those walls. I think that's a positive step forward. It talks about the need for training and a safe work environment, which are two persistent issues for Ontario Corrections staff, and the lack of those, or a plan to address them. So, as the nature of criminality evolves and the use of technology and other different hazards that exist and new hazards that exist, the nature of the training to deal with that has to evolve as well. And that's a whole nother component to the day-to-day operations that this government hasn't the talk about it. It is spoken about in the bill, but that costs money, and it requires a plan. And I haven't, again, heard from this government that they're willing or ready to do that. We would like to see a plan. We would like to see comprehensive support and ongoing training explicitly supported with some dollars. But that, you know, again, maybe that's to be determined at some point. Let's circle back, Speaker. The OPSU research has provided staff, ministry staff, with tables that show, well, I would imagine they've provided every party staff with tables that show that new CO hires since 2016 were in the 500-person range. So it's not clear how many of those are full-time or part-time. But frontline staff suggest that their numbers haven't been bolstered, as most of the new hires are used as backfill for existing staffing complements. So in this era of precarious work and you know, an economy that is built up on part-time precarious work under the tenure of this government, here we are, the actual government of the day, adding to that you know, metric of the economy by ensuring, you know, or you know, under-resourcing these facilities with part-time workers. How do you raise a family? How do you dedicate yourself to a professional career in community safety when you know you're going to spend the majority of your career on the part-time call list as a backfill to, you know, those that have been hired on full-time, you know, waiting in the list, in the queue to where you can finally be hired full-time through, you know, retirement or attrition. That's not a way to ensure confidence and breed confidence in the facility. It's a way to, you know, have folks potentially get in, but be constantly wondering about their economic security and looking for other opportunities. You know, I mean, long, I guess, is the era where you could have one solid, secure job with benefits and a retirement plan that you could bank on and provide for your family and contribute to your communities. That's not the system that's being built in our corrections system, and I don't think it breeds good, you know, quality work.
Excuse me, point of order.
About this important speech, but I don't believe we have quorum here.
Count, please.
Quorum is not present, Speaker.
Could you ring the bells, please?
Not present, Speaker.
Or from Essex may continue.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I'm glad I have the attention of all my colleagues in the House for my riveting one-hour lead. And it is an important debate, and I'm honored to contribute to it, and I hope that I've provided some information that can assist the government and assist my colleagues in trying to come together to identify the priorities that I think and we believe can make the system better. And it's pretty clear here, Speaker. I mean, despite the reforms built into Bill 6, what it comes down to is political will. It's one of those issues, Speaker. It comes down to a government that's ready to put their money where their mouth is. And yeah, you heard that right. Get the resources out the door. Support mental health programming in our communities. Support complements in our facilities, complements of COs and probation and parole officers that adequately meet and match the demographic and the volume of cases that they deal with and inmates that they are charged to guard. Any further degradation of this system at this level, as I've said, it's at crisis level. I don't think that can be argued. It's at critical level. If we go backwards, it's going to get worse, and the costs are going to escalate. The costs to those who work in the facilities are going to escalate, and the costs to our communities are going to escalate in increased recidivism, in increased costs through our criminal justice system, increased costs through our penal system. This is, it's the definition of insanity. Continuing to do what you've done and expecting a different result will not yield a fix to this problem. So, the overlying theme, I think, of my speech here today is that there's a whole lot more that this government can do, and should have done in the past to have alleviated the pressures on the system and to have prevented it from getting here in the first place, which is the biggest shame. That's the thing that I think people need to understand. We didn't have to get here. We didn't have to be here, where you see the drastic numbers of violence on inmate on CO violence and inmate on inmate violence. We didn't have to get to a point where our facilities are overcrowded to the extent where they start to violate human rights. Like, this is Ontario. This is our province. And that's the status, that's the state of affairs in our criminal penal system. And I urge this government to, I know they're in bargaining, and I'll tell you an old adage as an old 40-year-old labor activist.
You're just a kid, buddy.
Yep, 40-year-old labor activist with probably 35 years of labor activism under my belt.
Hi, Bo.
Yeah, hi, Mom, Dad. But, here's the adage. Cheap work isn't skilled, and skilled work isn't cheap. And that applies to, a whole host of different professions. Whether you're building cabinets, or you're laying tile, or you're, frontline healthcare workers, or your casino workers who are on strike in Windsor. I want to give them a shout out right now, who are fighting for fairness at the bargaining table and respect, under a monolith that makes a massive amount of wealth. That needs to be shared and spread around in our community so that those workers who do a great job, who meet, the highest threshold, are compensated adequately. And it goes definitely for those in our system, in our correction system, in our probation parole system. It means compensating them well. It means validating and respecting the job that they do. And it means adding the resources so that they can do it well. That means more COs, more probation and parole officers, and the adequate supports in terms of programming that we know will make the job safer, will make it more effective, and will save us money in the long run. I understand that. New Democrats understand that. Our leader, Andrea Horvath, understands that. And our communities understand that. And we're ready and willing and able to provide the support that our communities are demanding and deserve, because it's the right thing to do, and the evidence is clear as well. This isn't something that we're making up on the fly and listening to the backroom bureaucrats that are saying, here, you can pinch a penny here and save $1 there, and things will be status quo. That hasn't happened. Things have gotten worse through that type of austerity agenda. We can't afford to do it, and our communities will be ill-served if that continues under this Liberal government. Something that needs to be changed immediately, and I hope that through the discussion around this bill, that members of the government acknowledge that as well. Because we can talk about the merits of the bill. I've already said New Democrats support the thrust of the bill, the intention of the bill, and the prescribed regulations and legislative initiatives in the bill. We support that. But the big issue is the price tag that this government hasn't identified that it's willing to pay and invest in making sure that this works. It will all be for naught if that isn't associated, if that isn't in tandem with legislation that identifies the requirements of our facilities and the needs of our frontline workers. Speaker, I want to thank you. I want to thank the members of this House, colleagues for their attention, and I certainly, definitely want to thank the corrections and community safety and probation parole officers that are out there working right now, keeping our community safe. We appreciate the work that you do, and our commitment is to make sure that you come home, everyone comes home at the end of the night. That's right. Thank you, Speaker.